I was 3 hours from home when I pulled into the rest stop, and the man at the far end of the lot had been watching me since I turned off the engine. It was just past midnight, I-40 eastbound, somewhere in the flat stretch of Oklahoma where the exits get 20 miles apart and the darkness is actual darkness, not the city kind. I've been driving since 9 that morning. The kind of tired where you stop feeling tired and start feeling strange. The rest stop had that particular loneliness. One overhead light flickering near the bathrooms, a vending machine humming against the brick wall, 2 other cars at the opposite end, neither running. I needed the bathroom. That's the only reason I stopped. The man was leaning against a white pickup near the tree line. Not parked in a space, just pulled to the edge of the lot, nose toward the trees. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't smoking. He was just standing there with his arms at his sides, watching my car. I sat for a moment with the engine running. Told myself he was just a guy stretching his legs. Lots of people stop here. I got out, kept him in my peripheral vision, and went to the bathroom. Fast, didn't linger. When I came out, he was closer. He hadn't crossed the lot. He was still near his truck. But the truck had moved. Rolled forward maybe 30 feet, now angled differently. Engine still off. He was standing at the front bumper now. I walked back to my car at a pace I tried to keep normal. Got in, locked the doors. He started walking toward me. Not fast, not running. Just walking at a steady pace directly toward my car, hands still at his sides. No expression I could read at that distance, just coming. I pulled out before he reached me. Didn't look back until I hit the on-ramp. He was standing at the edge of the lot where my car had been, still watching. I called my wife, told her what happened. She told me to stop at the next truck stop with people inside and wait. I did. I sat in a booth and drank bad coffee until 4 in the morning. 2 weeks later, I was telling this to a guy I worked with. He went quiet in a way that made me stop talking. He pulled up something on his phone and handed it to me. A news article, 6 months prior. A woman had been found in the tree line at that rest stop. The case was still open. The article included a description of a vehicle seen in the lot that night. White pickup, no plates. We didn't realize someone else had a key until the second night. 4 of us had rented the cabin through one of those vacation sites. A long weekend in the Ozarks, November, off-season rate. The owner lived in Kansas City, communicated only by text, had left the key in a lockbox on the porch. Standard. The cabin was deep on a private road, at least 4 miles from the nearest neighbor. Cell service was partial at best. 1 bar that came and went depending on where you stood. The nearest town was 20 minutes back on a 2-lane highway. The first night was fine. Fire, drinks, cards. We went to bed late. Second night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up and couldn't tell you why. No sound I could identify, just awake, suddenly, the way you get when something has changed in a room. I lay still and listened. The front door opened. One soft click of the latch, the particular creak of that specific floorboard just inside. I'd learned it the first day. Then nothing. No footsteps. Just that. I shook my friend Jake awake and put my hand over his mouth before he could speak. His eyes went wide. I mouthed, "Someone's inside." We lay there for a long time. No other sounds, no movement. Eventually Jake went first. He's built like a linebacker. He went through the bedroom door with a fireplace poker and I was right behind him. Nobody. The front door was unlocked. We were certain we'd locked it. We checked the whole cabin, every room, every closet. The back door locked from inside, untouched. The windows all latched. We didn't sleep again. We sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. In the daylight, we found the boot print, just one, in the mud just inside the front door, large, deep tread, pointing inward. We left that morning, called the rental owner from the road. He was apologetic, confused, said he'd never given a key to anyone else. The lockbox combination was unique to our booking. A month later, I looked up the property on the county assessor's site. The owner listed wasn't the man we'd rented from. I called the number associated with the listing, disconnected. I reported it to the county sheriff's non-emergency line. A deputy called me back. He was quiet for a moment when I told him the address. "That property," he said slowly, "has come up before." He wouldn't say more than that. He took my contact information. Nobody ever followed up. I worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse for 8 months. By the end of the 3rd month, I knew someone was living inside. The facility was massive, 200,000 square feet of racking, a dozen loading bays, 1 security guard for the whole building on overnight, me. I walked the perimeter twice per shift and monitored the cameras the rest of the time. It started with small things, a door in the far northwest corner that I'd secured on my first walk being ajar on my second, a bathroom that fogged with steam when I entered it at 4 in the morning. Not the shower fog that lingers, but fresh, recent. Once, a smell near the emergency exit at the back of the building that had no source. Food, cooked food, faint, gone by the time I doubled back. I told my supervisor. He said the building had settling issues and the ventilation pulled smells from outside. He said I should document anomalies and not worry. I started documenting. The northwest corner had a section of racking that was rarely inventoried. Obsolete stock, pallets nobody moved. I started paying attention to it. One night in February, I found a sleeping bag tucked between 2 pallets on the lowest level, completely hidden unless you were crouched, thin, military style, recently used, still warm. I backed out and called my supervisor from across the building. By the time anyone responded, the sleeping bag was gone. The supervisor walked the area with me, found nothing, and suggested I'd misidentified a furniture pad. I stopped telling my supervisor. Instead, I started watching the cameras more carefully. The northwest corner had 1 camera, positioned at a wide angle. For 3 weeks, I watched it every night. Then on a Tuesday at 3:20 in the morning, I saw a shadow cross the bottom of the frame. Just the shadow. Whatever cast it was outside the camera's view. Nothing for another week. Then one night I found my logbook moved. I kept it at the security station. It had been on the left side of the desk when I did my first walk. When I came back, it was on the right, and was open to a page I hadn't opened. Someone had been at my desk while I walked the floor. I quit 2 weeks later. I know that sounds like the wrong ending to the story. You want me to have found out who it was, why they were there, whether they were dangerous. I have a partial answer. 6 months after I quit, I heard from a former coworker that they'd found a space behind the racking in the northwest corner. A cavity about 8 feet deep that wasn't on any floor plan. There had been someone living there. He said the police told management the person had been there based on the evidence for over a year. I had been walking that building alone at night, every night, for 8 of those months. I think about that a lot. I've given exactly 1 person a ride in my life. I will never do it again. It was late September, rural highway in northern Arkansas, the kind of road that cuts through timber company land for 30 miles with nothing on either side. I was coming back from a fishing trip, alone, truck loaded with gear. She was standing at the shoulder in the rain, mid-30s maybe, duffel bag, no car visible in either direction. The nearest town was 15 miles back. I stopped. Against every instinct I've since learned to respect, I stopped. She got in, thanked me, said her car had broken down 6 miles back. She was quiet, polite, asked where I was headed. I told her. She said that worked. She was trying to get to the junction at Route 14. 15 minutes in, I noticed she wasn't wet. It was raining hard. She'd been standing on the shoulder. Her jacket was dry, her hair was dry. The duffel bag had no water on it. I said nothing, kept driving. Around mile 10, she asked if I had a phone charger. I said I didn't, which was true. I'd left mine at the cabin. She nodded and looked out the window. A few minutes later, I glanced at my center console. My phone was gone. I always put it in the cup holder. It was there when she got in. I remembered the notification I'd checked right before I stopped for her. I said calmly that I need to pull over and check my tire. I'd felt something. I pulled to the shoulder, put it in park, and got out. Walked around to the bed of the truck, as if checking something. I needed to think. When I came back to the driver's door, she was turned toward me, in the seat. Her hand was in the duffel bag. She was watching me with an expression I cannot fully describe, except to say it had no social performance in it. No smile, no neutral politeness, just watching. "We're almost there," she said. I got back in, drove, said nothing. When we reached the Route 14 junction, I slowed and she got out before I fully stopped. "No thank you." She just walked across the road toward the tree line and didn't look back. I found my phone under the seat. It had been gone through. The case was closed, wrong, flap reversed, something I always do the same way. I don't know what she was looking for. I don't know if I was chosen specifically or if I was just whoever stopped. I've driven that road a dozen times since. I've never seen her. I check the cup holder every few miles now. Old habit I can't shake. My running partner and I didn't notice the man following us until mile 4. By mile 6, I understood we were being herded. We ran the same trail every Saturday, a 10-mile loop through the state forest preserve outside our town, early morning, usually by ourselves. We've been doing it for 2 years. The man appeared behind us somewhere around the first water crossing. I noticed him the same way you notice most things on a trail, a shape at the edge of perception, filed away as a fellow runner, moved on. He was still behind us at mile 4, same distance, consistently. Not gaining, not falling back. I mentioned it to Dana. She glanced back and said he was probably just running our pace. Around mile 5, the trail splits. Left continues the main loop. Right is an unmarked service road that cuts back toward the parking area. Shorter, but rarely used. Muddy, overgrown. Most runners don't know it. We went left. I looked back at the split. He turned left. At mile 6, there's a section where the trail narrows and goes through a dense corridor of cedar. Maybe 200 yards where you can't see more than 10 feet in any direction. We entered it at our normal pace. At the other end, Dana grabbed my arm. He was there, ahead of us, standing at the edge of the cedars, facing back toward us. He'd gone around. He was between us and the rest of the loop, between us and the parking area, and behind us was 2 miles of trail with no access points. He started walking toward us. We went into the trees. Off trail, hard left, pushing through brush that tore at our arms and legs. I don't know the terrain there. It's outside the marked area. We ran as straight as we could manage and came out on a fire road I didn't recognize. We ran the fire road for 20 minutes until we found a gate and a country road, flagged down a passing truck. The driver took us to the parking area. Dana's car had a single flat rear driver's side, the valve stem pulled. We called the police. 2 officers walked the trail and found nothing. They took a description. The ranger we spoke to afterward listened carefully and said, without much surprise, that they'd had incidents in that section of the preserve over the past year. He said we'd done the right thing by leaving the trail. I asked what kind of incidents. He was quiet for a moment. Hikers have to be assisted out, he said. Like that was the whole answer. Dana and I don't run that trail anymore. We've never talked about exactly what we think would have happened if we hadn't gone through those trees. Some things are better left as questions. The man who moved in above me didn't own furniture. I know because I never heard any. No scrape of chairs, no thud of boxes, no television. For 3 months, all I heard was footsteps. That alone would mean nothing, but the footsteps followed a pattern I began to recognize, and the pattern aligned with mine. When I was in the kitchen, he was in the kitchen. When I moved to the bedroom, he moved to the bedroom. At first I told myself the layout of the apartments was identical and he simply kept the same domestic schedule I did. Reasonable. Then I started testing it. I'd sit still for 30 minutes, then move suddenly to a different room. The footsteps would pause, then relocate. I'd go from the living room to the bathroom and back in under a minute, deliberately erratic. He'd follow. I went to my building manager. She was sympathetic, took a note, said she'd speak to him about noise. 2 days later, she told me she'd knocked and received no answer, but the lease was current and paid ahead. I asked who he was. She said she wasn't able to share tenant information with me. I started keeping different hours, coming home late, leaving early, varying my schedule. The footsteps adjusted within a day or 2. One Saturday morning around 6, I heard him above the bedroom, directly above me, and I walked out my front door and up the steps on impulse. I wanted to see his face. I knocked. He answered. Mid-40s, unremarkable looking. He smiled at me with the practiced case of someone who had been expecting this conversation. I said I was his downstairs neighbor and introduced myself. He gave me a name I no longer trust was real. I hope I haven't disturbed you, he said. And then, before I could respond, you keep late hours. I hadn't told him I was his downstairs neighbor before that moment. I'd knocked on a door in a hallway with 4 units. I said something non-committal and left. I installed a door camera that afternoon. Over the next 2 weeks, it recorded him leaving his apartment 3 times. Each time he paused on the landing and looked directly into the camera, not with surprise. He moved out in January without notice, left nothing. The manager said he'd paid through March but simply vacated. I've lived here 3 more years since. The footsteps were replaced by a young couple who fight about parking and have a dog that barks at thunder. I've never been so relieved by noise in my life. We were 4 days into a backcountry elk hunt when we found the other camp, and the man there asked us to leave before we saw his face. The area was remote, national forest land in western Colorado, a drainage we'd hiked 8 miles into, above 10,000 feet. In 4 years of hunting that zone, we'd never encountered another party. That's why we went back. His camp was in a hollow below the main ridge, nearly invisible. A single dark tent, no fire ring, no camp chairs. The kind of setup that isn't meant to be seen. My brother-in-law walked into it before we spotted it because it was positioned in the shadow of a rock outcrop and we were focused on the tree line above. A voice said, "Stop right there." We stopped. He was behind us somehow. We'd walked past without seeing him. He was at a distance I'd put at 30 yards, standing in the trees, and he was dressed in a way that explained why we'd missed him. Full camo, head to toe, face obscured. "This is my camp," he said. "I need you to move on." My brother-in-law said we hadn't realized anyone was in the area and we'd be happy to give him space. "Then go," the man said, "and don't come back to this drainage." We left. When we made our camp that evening, we went through what we'd seen. The tent had been large, the kind that fits 4 people. 1 tent, no food hung, no camp kitchen. We'd been close enough that if there had been any smell of cooking or refuse, we'd have caught it. Nothing. We debated leaving. The hunt was going well. We decided to stay to the east of the main ridge and avoid his drainage. On the 3rd day, my brother-in-law found that gut pile. Elk, recently field dressed, about a mile from the man's camp. No hide, no quarters missing, the whole animal opened and left. We packed out the next morning. When we reached the trailhead, there was one other vehicle in the lot, no plates. I filed an incident report with the Forest Service the following week. A ranger called me back and asked several specific questions about the camp location, the size of the tent, and what the man had been wearing. At the end of the call, I asked if they'd had other reports from that drainage. The ranger paused before answering. "We've had a few," she said. "Different years." She thanked me for calling. I asked if we'd done the right thing by leaving. "Yes," she said, without hesitating. That was the answer I expected. It still didn't make me feel better. I was behind the counter when the 2 men came in, and I knew within 30 seconds that something was wrong, and within a minute I understood they were deciding something. I'd worked that store for 2 years, small place, 24 hours, on a state highway outside a town of 3,000. After midnight, the traffic is nothing. A trucker now and then, an occasional local. Most nights I'd see a dozen customers between 10 and 6. It was 2:15 in the morning. They came in together but separated immediately, which is a thing you notice. One went to the far coolers. One started a slow walk up the main aisle, not shopping, just moving, checking the store, checking me. No other customers. My coworker had called out sick. I was alone. I moved to the register and kept my hands visible and my face neutral. You learn not to show that you've noticed. Showing it changes the timeline of whatever is being planned. The one by the coolers wasn't looking at the coolers. He was looking at the parking lot through the glass, watching for cars. The one in the aisle reached the counter and set down nothing, no item. He looked at me for a moment. "How many cameras you got?" he asked. I said I wasn't sure of the exact count, that it was a corporate system. He nodded slowly, looking up at the one above the register. In the 3 seconds he was looking up, I hit the silent alarm under the counter lip. Old habit from training I'd half forgotten. My hand found it without thinking. The man by the cooler said something I didn't catch. The one at the counter looked at me again. Long look. The kind of assessment that had a decision on the other side of it. Then he said, "You got cigarettes behind you? Marlboro Red?" I got the cigarettes, rang them up. He paid cash. They left. I stood at the register for about a full minute before I trusted my legs. 2 patrol cars arrived 11 minutes after the alarm. By then, the men in their car were long gone. The officer who took my statement asked if they'd said anything threatening. I said no. He nodded and wrote that down. Then he said 2 stores got hit tonight. One in Pryor, one in Claremore. Same description. He looked at me. 3rd one they walked into. They didn't hit either. Any idea why? I told him about the alarm. He wrote that down too. When he left, he told me I'd done well. I put in my notice the following week. Some jobs stopped being worth it. There is a particular kind of fear that is perfectly quiet, and I felt it when I realized the man behind me on the trail was not a skier. I was doing a solo backcountry day, a route I'd run a dozen times, a groomed Nordic trail that connects two valley sections through about 8 miles of forest, mid-January, a Thursday, the kind of cold blue day with hard snow that makes sound carry strange. I'd seen him at the trailhead. He was standing near the information board when I arrived, dressed in dark clothing, no skis, no snowshoes, just standing. I registered him and moved on. An hour in, I heard footsteps on the snow behind me. Not the swish and kick of skis, footsteps. I turned and saw him 50 yards back, walking on the packed surface of the trail, hands in his pockets. No pack, no gear. Just a man walking a backcountry ski trail in the middle of January, miles from the nearest road. I picked up my pace. The trail at that section runs straight for almost a mile, and over the next 10 minutes I checked behind me 4 times. He was still there, not running, not falling back either. I reached a junction where the trail branches toward a warming hut, 300 yards off the main route. I took it. The hut is staffed on weekends. On Thursdays it's locked, but it's a structure. It's visible from the ridge, and I needed to not be moving in a straight line with a man behind me. I reached the hut and turned. He had stopped at the junction, standing at the fork looking toward the hut. We watched each other cross that distance. Then he turned and walked back the way we'd come. I stayed at the hut for 40 minutes. I ate my lunch slowly and watched the tree line and thought through my options. I had a satellite communicator in my pack. I'd almost left it at home that morning. I skied back to the trailhead on a different route, a fire road that adds 3 miles but bypasses the main trail entirely. His car, I assumed it was his. There were only 3 in the lot, and I knew the other 2. It was a dark sedan parked at the far end, backed in. It was still there when I left. I filed a report with the Forest Service that evening. The ranger I spoke to asked if the man had anything or made any physical approach. I said no to both. He said without a verbal threat or physical contact there wasn't much to act on, but he'd note it anyway and pass it to the county. I understand that answer. I've thought about it a lot. I ski with a partner now, every time, no exceptions. I no longer leave the satellite communicator at home. I want to be careful about how I tell this story because I know how it sounds, and I know what some people will say it was. So I'll just say what I saw and let it be what it was. I was 3 days into a solo backpacking trip in the Cascades, a route I'd done twice before, a high traverse that crosses above tree line for about 12 miles before dropping back into a drainage. Late August, perfect weather. No reason for the trip to be anything other than what it was. On the second afternoon, I was crossing an exposed ridgeline when I noticed the figure below me in the valley. It was moving along the tree line, parallel to my direction of travel, maybe 600 or 700 feet below, moving at a pace that matched mine closely. I put my binoculars on it. My first thought was person, upright, moving on 2 legs, a swinging gait, covered ground efficiently. Too large. I've spent enough time in the backcountry to know bears on 2 legs. I've seen them at distance. I've seen them stand. I've seen them move. This was different in a way I can't precisely articulate, except to say the proportions were wrong. The shoulder width relative to height, the length of the stride. It tracked me for the better part of 2 hours. Every time I stopped, it stopped. Every time I moved, it moved. It stayed below the tree line, never fully exposed, using the edge of the forest in a way that felt deliberate. Then I came around a bend in the ridge and saw, on a rock outcrop to my left, a man. Human, clearly. Sitting on the rock watching the valley below. Watching the same tree line I'd been watching. He had binoculars. He lowered them when he heard me approach. He was in his 60s, weathered, experienced looking backcountry type. We made eye contact. I pointed toward the valley. Did you see that? He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I've turned over many times since. Then he said, been following it for 3 days. I asked what he thought it was. He picked up his binoculars again and looked back toward the tree line. I know what I think, he said. I'm trying to decide if I'm right. He wouldn't say more. We camped separately that night, half a mile apart. In the morning he was already gone. I have not gone back to that ridge. I know there are explanations. I know the mind fills in gaps, distances distort, fatigue affects judgment. I know all of that. I also know what I saw moved through that valley for 2 straight hours without making a sound I could hear, and when I reached the drainage the next morning, the tracks in the mud at the creek crossing were not bear tracks. I photographed them and have never shown them to anyone. I'm not sure I want to know what someone would say. The motel had 16 rooms, and I was the only guest, and the man at the front desk knew that before I told him. I'd driven past it twice before deciding. Middle of nowhere, southern Missouri, the kind of place that exists because it existed 50 years ago and nobody has gotten around to closing it. A neon sign missing several letters. The parking lot cracked and sprouting grass along the seams. It was 11 at night and I had 3 more hours to my destination, and I'd been awake since 5. I went in. The man behind the desk was maybe 50. He had the unhurried manner of someone who hadn't been surprised in a long time. He handed me a key before I'd given him my preference. Room number 7. "Quiet tonight," I said, making conversation. "Just you," he said. I paid cash, signed the register, walked to my room. The room was what those rooms always are. Functional, faded, a television bolted to the dresser. I checked the door lock. Standard chain plus knob lock. I slid the chain, tested the knob, sat on the bed. The connecting door to room 8 had no chain, just the knob. I turned it. Locked from the other side. I pushed the dresser in front of it. I don't know what made me get up at 2 in the morning. Some instinct below conscious thought, the animal part. I was at the window before I was fully awake. The man from the front desk was standing in the parking lot. Not smoking, nothing in his hands, facing my room. Standing absolutely still. My window was dark, he shouldn't have been able to see me, but he was looking directly at my window. I dressed without turning on a light, packed my bag in the dark, every few seconds checking the window. He didn't move. I checked the knob lock on the front door, still locked, chain still on. I sat in the chair facing the door until 4 in the morning, then walked out to my car with keys between my fingers and drove away without going back to the office. About a mile down the highway, I turned my lights on. I've thought about what the benign explanation is. Insomniac owner checking the lot, night air habit. I've thought about it a lot. What I keep coming back to is not what he was doing, but the fact that he already knew when I checked in that I was the only guest. I hadn't told him I was the only car in the lot. I hadn't told him anything. He just knew. We were 2 days down the river when we understood that the men on the bank had been following us. A canoe trip that my father and I had done for 10 years. Same stretch of the Buffalo River in Arkansas. 4 days. Campsites we knew by name. A ritual. The kind of trip where you stop paying attention because everything is familiar. We saw them first on the morning of the second day. 2 men on the eastern bank, standing above a rock shelf, watching us pass. No rods, no camp visible, just watching. My father raised a hand. Neither of them responded. That afternoon, same 2 men, a mile downstream, same elevated position, same stillness. My father said nothing. He's not a man given to alarm, but I saw him check his map after dinner and I knew he was doing the same math I was. On the 3rd morning, we broke camp early, before full light. Moved fast, ate breakfast on the water. Around midday, we pulled over at a gravel bar to filter water. The tree line on the east bank was thick there, obscuring the slope. One of them stepped out of the trees on our bank. He'd crossed somewhere above us, ahead of us, and come down through the forest. He was 30 feet away when I saw him, standing on our gravel bar, between us and the canoe. He was smiling. He said something about the fishing, asked if we'd had luck. Normal enough words in a voice with nothing normal in it. My father stood up from the water's edge and I watched him go through something. The internal calculus of 50 years of backcountry experience deciding on a course of action. He walked directly to the man, closed the distance to 10 feet, which is not what you do if you're frightened, and looked at him steadily. "We're going to get back in that canoe," my father said, "and I need you to let us do that." The man looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. We got in the canoe and moved to the center of the river and paddled hard. We didn't stop again until we reached the takeout, 6 hours ahead of schedule. We loaded the truck and drove without stopping to eat. An hour down the highway, my father said, "There was a second one in the trees behind you." I hadn't seen him. My father had. We filed a report with the Park Service the next morning. The ranger took it seriously, asked for a description, said they'd patrol that stretch. My father and I have been back twice since. We go together. We tell people where we are. We don't stop for long in places with limited sight lines. My father doesn't talk about what he saw in the second man's face when he stepped aside. I've never asked.